The Owl House is a show that has some of the most interesting naming conventions I've enjoyed in a while. Lots of shows choose character names based on common or obscure meanings, but the Owl House naming philosophy stuck out to me because of how boldly literal it is. But why would that be special? Firstly, there is the name and what it means in the context of the world and the narrative. Second, there's what the name means in a meta-narrative context, which means outside the narrative. To us, the viewers. I'm going to go by broad character groups, discussing the names as much of the meanings as I can, and I'll share my thoughts about my interpretation of why the name may have been chosen. Please note that baby name websites are notoriously unreliable, so if you're looking for a reason about why this video might be valuable, a lot of the analysis here is drawn from a combination of linguistic, historical, and contextual understanding of these names. As a reminder, before we get started, idlescree's content library is expanding. We recently released a video on Tokyo Drift, hosted by the Bird, so please be sure to check that out and remember to subscribe and turn on all notifications to make sure you never miss an idlescree upload. Without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the Hex Squad. Luz Noceda is a name we covered recently, but the name Luz translates to light in Spanish, and Noceda, which means literally field of nut trees, is also very punny. Noceda can be taken informally to mean do not yield or do not give in. Combined, the name Luz Noceda literally means light do not give in, which suits our protagonist perfectly given her association with light and her role in the story. Luz acts as a light in the meta-narrative of the show, shining a light on the problems of the Boiling Isles and also on the issues of individuals she comes into contact with, revealing weakness, self-delusion, and also the path forward that enables them to change themselves. Luz is the source of light in the series, and I think it is a fantastic name for a genuinely brilliant protagonist. Willow's name packs a hell of a punch, and like Amity, has a quality of summoning up a very specific image that effortlessly takes on additional meanings as the character grows. Park, which is a common and visibly Korean name, was probably chosen for being immediately recognizable in that way, and also happens to reference gourds or cypress trees depending on who you're asking. But what I really want to dig into is the willow tree itself. Willow trees immediately evoke the image of a weeping willow, the image of which is associated with sadness and shyness. But there are a few other things about willow trees that should be taken into consideration when talking about this character. For one thing, willow trees, like the other magical tree referenced in the Owl House, the hawthorn, but we'll get to that, are associated with healing, as its bark was used as a fever reducer for thousands of years before becoming famous for giving us what would become aspirin. Additionally, willow trees tend to prefer acidic soil and have very broad and shallow root systems that are extremely capable of absolutely destroying the foundations of homes, indoor pools, and other such constructions. Willow trees have the power to break foundations, and they provide shade and healing and protection for all kinds of creatures. I think Willow Park is a fantastically chosen name that perfectly expresses this character at the beginning of her narrative and also covers her transformation into the protector she becomes in a story all about dismantling oppressive power. Oh, Gus. Gus did a bit dirty in this show. I truly think that if we'd had more time, the show would have had the opportunity to dig a bit deeper into Gus and his mostly aborted character arc, but we will work with what we've got, because if nothing else, Gus's name is cool as hell. Augustus means great, splendid, magnificent even. The most famous Augustus in history was the Emperor Caesar Augustus, the founder of the Roman Empire, and a porter, in North America at least, was associated with transporting luggage or other heavy loads. But if we wanted to take a deeper look into this, which we are, it's cool to note that, honestly, Gus carries a very heavy burden, the burden of truth. Meanwhile, in Europe, a porter generally had to do with controlling doors, entranceways, or gates. Portals, if you will. Extending the metaphor even more, this name can be associated with lenses or eyes, considering that eyes are often referred to as portals to the soul. This is very fitting since Gus's main form of magic is illusion, used to trick the eyes and the mind, but the narrative continually stresses that the key to creating good illusions is observation, but also authenticity. Gus is a magnificent name for a magnificent character, and honestly, I just wish we had gotten a little more time with him. Amity's name is one of my favorites in the entire show. Her name is a classic witch name in that it deliberately invokes Puritan conventions, being a virtue name that means friendship, but also has extremely ghostly connotations, which contribute to the first impression of power, spookiness, and danger that she brings to the story. After all, she does enter the narrative as an antagonist. Blight as a name probably has its origins in the word blithe, which means happy or cheerful, but for the form that we get the name, it comes out to Amity Blight, friend plus plant disease. She is a literal blight on friendship when we meet her, but as she grows, the harmony and friendship parts of her name take precedence as she learns from her mistakes and develops healthy boundaries for herself that lead to better and stronger relationships with her family and chosen family. Eventually, she becomes one of the strongest and clearest communicators in the entire show. Amity Blight lives up to her name in every phase of the story, and it's both extremely clever and very evocative of the power of a witch. Truly, if you had to come up with the ultimate witch name for a character from a witch world, Amity Blight sets the bar high, as she does in all things. If you've watched much of our channel, you have probably deduced that Hunter is my personal favorite character. Incidentally, he's also the only person in this cast without a last name, although that doesn't stop the fandom from ripping our hair out over trying to tag posts about him, because what do we call him? Oh my god. Hunter's name, like a lot of things about him, starts off tragic. Belos clearly named him as a vile play on the term witch hunter, and thus reduces Hunter in his eyes as nothing more than a tool made for the job of hunting his enemies and retrieving sustenance for him. But as most names in this show, there's a lot more than meets the eye here. Hunter starts off in a place of literally hunting Talisman for Belos, sure, but what I think is most interesting about Hunter's name is that he's actively on a search for something quite separate from Belos' interests, himself. Hunter is hunting for his own identity outside of the narrative Belos has invented for him, as well as outside of Caleb, the ancestor he doesn't know but whose image he carries. The conflict between Hunter's name as a tool of subjugation and his struggle to connect it to his personhood is one of my favorite things in the show. Hunter and all the Grimwalkers represent a physical incarnation of everything Belos, no matter how hard he tries, cannot control: the Boiling Isles and Caleb. Much like a wolf dog, an unethically created hybrid of conflicting natures and instincts that results in a timid and extremely dangerous creature, Hunter struggles between submission and the pursuit of who he is. Eventually, he's pried off the Golden Guard identity and simply becomes Hunter, and later gains an association with wolves, the social pack animal, the protector, and also capable of biting the hand that feeds in order to save himself. So good on you, Hunter, Wittebane, Clawthorne, Noceda. Hunter is a fabulously reflective name that perfectly encapsulates this character's story and rings always with the call of the wild. Alright, we'll get the easy one out of the way first. Wittebane literally just means Bane of Witches in ye old talk. I strongly suspect that this may not have even been the last name Caleb and Philip were born to, but one that Caleb may have adopted for them when they moved to Graysfield as orphans for both protection and promise to a community that would have regarded them with incredible fear and suspicion as orphans. But digging into the names of the brothers who form this Cain and Abel heart of the Owl House, there's no shortage of irony that is so iconic of the names of this show. Caleb is a biblical name derived from the words kal and lev, which literally means wholehearted and takes on the meaning of loyalty. Oof. Philip, on the other hand, is not really a biblical name and comes off very second son-ish. The literal meaning of Philip is the Greek lover of horses. And at face value, that sounds very silly, right? But a person in the comments of our Belos video pointed out that the name is related to the fact that this is almost certainly a reference to a mounted soldier, which means that Philip is a name that could mean warrior, which would certainly play into this bastard's disgusting martyr complex and suits his serial crusader motivations. And it also pairs very well with the name that he will wear for the greater majority of his life, whatever this is. Belos is the name that Philip Wittebane, our primary antagonist, gave his conqueror identity. And given that it's kind of a nonsense name, we will do our best to get into the mind of the bitch himself and extrapolate potential meanings. There is an argument to be made for Belos as a name derived from the Babylonian mythical figure of Baal, which after 1,000 years of Christian telephone has become synonymous with King of Demons. This does play into the naming conventions of this show in terms of irony and is perfectly serviceable. However, my interpretation of the name, which you may have seen in a further breakdown breakdown if you have watched our Belos video is that the name Belos is very similar to the Spanish word bello, meaning beautiful. The most beautiful of the angels was Lucifer Morningstar, who was cast out of heaven and ended up ruling over hell. And when you compare Lucifer's story to Belos, the similarities really start to creep out at you. He's even ruined by Lucifer's same sin, stubborn pride, and he never ever learns from his mistakes. This name is even more ironic than Hunter's, and one of the things I love about Belos is that this soggy saltine of a human being who has dressed his serial killer compulsions into delusions of religious genocide shows up to a hell realm and eventually becomes the thing he despises the most. A continued trend in media that I am quite enjoying. So let's pour one out for the Goop Man for potentially having the most ironic and true name in the entire show, dying to the name he doesn't even identify himself with. Because the names of these characters are so deeply intertwined, I'm going to take the Clawthorne family as a whole. First, I'm going to do Dell because the main thing to keep in mind about it is that simply it is a nature tree name that further connects the Clawthorns to the land they live on. It means meadow and is Old English in origin, but the bulk of this section is going to focus more on the Clawthorne name and the names of the ladies who are all interconnected and tied to a interesting tradition of rebellion and transformation. Clawthorne is fun, and I'm doing it separately because of its power and attachment to several characters. It is a portmanteau of Claw because funny, violent, and owl related, and Hawthorn. The Hawthorn, like the willow tree, is widely regarded as a magical plant. For this context, we'd best look into the magical trees of the Druidic traditions, as the Clawthorns have a lot of heavy Druidic imagery and have a powerful familial relationship to palistrom trees, wild magic, and their environment. Hawthorns are also sometimes called corpse trees. So in addition to their magic, they have these smelly berries that give this magical aspect, this dark, naturalistic edge that I think plays really well into how this show holds up magic and nature, especially with Dana's vision of the Boiling Isles in mind. Ida and the Clawthorns represent the Boiling Isles in a way no other character or set of characters do. The Lyn suffix that connects most of the female members of the Clawthorne family comes up as Celtic in origin, but is more specifically Welsh for lake. And it's also popular as an independent first name. What I think is most significant about this, though, is that it basically gives the Clawthorne women a naming pattern, which Lilith notably falls outside of, and we'll get to her in a bit. Initially, I was inclined to write this off as a kind of cutesy link that makes them thematically similar and also makes them sound kind of old-timey. But let's wade a little deeper into this to see why this might be more significant. Lyn, as we previously established, means lake, and bodies of water in this show are hugely transformative, representing portals, transformation, death, and rebirth, which gives an additional magical dimension to the names of these ladies. The name Ida appears independently in a number of languages, similar to a name like Kai, and as a result lends itself to a ton of interpretation. But my stab at it is a three-pronged trident. Grasping at the fact that the Clawthorns and frankly a lot of the Wild Witch imagery in this show is connected to druids and Celtic stuff, I would surmise that Ida's name is chosen from the name Edda of Germanic origin, and that is sometimes written as meaning wealth, fortune, prosperity, all things associated with power. Combined with the Lyn suffix, we have this sense of transforming fortune, transforming power, which is extremely true of Ida at every point in her story. Additionally, I have mentioned before that I strongly suspect that Ida's name was chosen as an allusion to Edward Elric from Fullmetal Alchemist, another very powerful character who shares a similar narrative arc, character design, and overall motifs with Ida. Gwen, like Dell, is another quick one, but it is important because Gwen, a Welsh name meaning holy, white, or sacred, combined with the Lyn suffix means sort of a blessed transformation, which is also true of her as well. And then we have Evelyn. This is a name I really enjoy in the context of how this show has it laid out. Evelyn is likely in reference to the biblical Eve. Now, Eve in myth, as the first woman, is fascinating to me, and it's important to remember that her profoundly enduring thing in myth is how she fell to the snake's temptation in pursuit of knowledge, and was the one who tempted Adam. In short, Eve was the reason Adam fell. And before any of you jump into the comments to yell that the Bible is more charitable about this than it is, please keep in mind that it's a Bronze Age document written in 3 different languages by many authors. And it's not even about what the text is actually saying. It's about what the predominant narrative that leaps into people's mind is when they hear the names like Eve, Cain, Abel, etc. It's usually going to be the most simplified pop culture version of it, because that's what makes it resonate with people in terms of familiarity alone. John Milton, who wrote wrote Paradise Lost, a classical Bible fanfic that would not be out of place on AO3 today, and informed about 90% of pop culture ideas about heaven, hell, and all its assorted characters, was one of the most charitable to Eve about this. For most of the Middle Ages, Eve was so despised as the cause of man's fall that the serpent was often depicted as having Eve's own face. The purpose of this lengthy background is this. Snakes and femininity are also represented in another character that is representing transformation and enlightenment about good and evil. But Evelyn herself is the one that, with Caleb, kicked off the events of the story by offering unenlightenment, showed Caleb a portal to step through, and thus kicked off the major events of the story. Evelyn, named for Eve, is the inciting incident at the root of the Owl House's history. Lilith. This is a name that I, the Bat, usually don't like seeing, and I have curated a list of edgy names I generally hiss at, primarily because such names stand in for an entire character archetype. Your name is Morgan? Shit, I already know everything about you and how you end, and you haven't had a single line of dialogue. You're Damien, or Crow, or any kind of Corvid? Better not be a boringly hot, depressed white twink with angst. God damn it! So Lilith is one of those names that I often roll my eyes at and go, okay, yeah, whatever, man. However, just because I don't like it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Sometimes it's boring and lazy, but there are good reasons to use names like this if desired, and Lilith Clawthorne is a great example of why. Truly going into the nitty-gritty of the Lilith story, its origins and transformations over the ages would have me here all day. But most importantly, the use of a name like this, or any of the ones on my list, would be to deliberately invoke that entire character archetype from whole cloth. By choosing the name Lilith, Dana wanted us to immediately think of the world's most famous female demon, Lilith, the supposed rebellious first wife of Adam, who refused to be condescended to as lesser and went off to fuck demons and birth monsters out of spite. Oh, this is a subversion. Well, sort of. I personally think the name was chosen along the lines of Amity Blight, in that the name Lilith evokes an image of feminine power and rebellion and a transgressive sexuality. However, while the specific traits of Lilith from most pop culture stories about her, the baby-eating, demon-banging mother of monsters, the part of feminine power, bravery, and even transgressive sexuality is also part of this Lilith. She is inarguably one of the most knowledgeable characters in the whole cast, and knowledge is power. She is brave enough to admit fault, to ask for help and grow, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to point out that Dana has confirmed Lilith as aromantic and asexual, which in this culture is pretty dang transgressive. Well played, Dana, and thank you for giving me my personal favorite use of the name Lilith in a long time. Camila is associated with devotion, adoration, and care, as the name has its origins in Roman religion. Camilla is a feminine form of Camillus, which was a name for an acolyte in Roman religious processions. Unlike Luce's name, though, which has a very specific combined meaning, Camilla's name lacks this, and is one of the only names in the show whose direct meaning as religious acolyte doesn't have a perfect analog to a particular theme, unless you want to stretch and hold it up as a contrast to Philip and the other toxic adult characters, whose relationships to the kids in this show are repeatedly revealed for being manipulative and selfish and altogether a failure of adulthood. It's possible that Camila was named after a specific person, or the name was chosen because it sounded nice rather than necessarily having a deeper connotation in that specific sense. But doing this grounds Camila in the experience of the viewer in the real world, and adds to her gravity in a story about all this crazy magic and wild antics. The gentle mundanity of her name punctuates the emotional chords of her relationship with Luce and the other children, and literally brings everything down to earth. It lends it all a much greater believability and emotional intimacy. Camila Noceda is a perfect name for a mother whose parenting is quite literally out of this world. Rain Whispers is another one of my favorite names. For most English speakers, the name has a lyrical, soft quality which is keeping with the theme of music and bards. But here's the thing, for the Boiling Isles, this name is terrifying! Rain would have a connotation of acid that corrodes and scours matter to atoms. And whispers, you mean the sound of acid, corroding and scouring matter to atoms. I love that this name seems chosen for its beauty and its subtlety and double meaning, which draws attention to the performance Raine puts on as a bard, but also as a double agent working against a genocidal, murderous regime. Fucking metal. Alright, V's name interpretation may be a bit of a stretch, but hear me out. It could be a reclamation of a cruel designation she was given by the Emperor's Coven. Grown in a lab and locked in cages, the basilisks of the Boiling Isles were given numbers instead of names. V's number was 5, depicted by the letter V in Roman numerals. This is something we will be discussing in a later video, but it's probably worth noting that there is another character in pop culture that has a lot in common with our shapeshifting little friend in terms of symbolizing rebellion, surviving one's fears, and critically, victory, and maybe some other important V words as well.
Verily, this vichyssoise of verbiage veers most verbose.
V's name is a well-chosen moniker given and transformed with intention by a wonderful character who refuses to remain a victim.
The man! The myth! The legend!
Let it never be said that idlescree ever forgets Steve again. The name Steve is a shortened version of Stephen or Stefan, which comes from the Greek word Stephanos, meaning wreath crown, and by extension, renown, honor, victory, or fame, which is fitting for the fan favorite ex-Coven scout. He is honorable. Eventually, Steve realizes that the Emperor's Coven aren't the good guys, and when that is proven to him by the Emperor's actions, he chooses to leave. A decision that proves his honor and victory towards positive growth, rather than clinging to the role in stagnation of fascist goon. A notable name for someone a little braver than the average everyman. King's name is played off as a joke in the beginning. A king is the ruler of a nation or independent state, and the title is usually inherited by birth. It is also a common dog name, which is where the visual gag is at the beginning. The idea of this tiny little demon child pretending to be the king of demons is honestly very silly and treated as such for most of season 1. However, in season 2, episode 3, Echoes of the Past, we learn that King may have some greater importance in the world of the Boiling Isles after all. And in Edge of the World, we learn that King is in fact the son of the Titan. This literally makes King the last living Titan, and in a way makes him king, or at least a prince of the Boiling Isles. However, by this point in the story, King no longer craves adoration and power, leading him to a better understanding of, well, wanting to be understood rather than wanting to be feared. And he does grow into his power and responsibility. He gains literal powers as he matures, and also ends up adopting a responsible sibling role with the Collector, semi-immortal being to a mortal being, about the relationship that their actions have to consequences. Heavy is the adorable head that wears this crown, but with his growth spurt, King is looking great. The Collector by itself doesn't mean much at face value, but it does create a strong distinction between collecting and archiving. It emphasizes his childishness and how he does things without necessarily thinking too hard about it. There is no order or organization, no methodology to his madness beyond, well, loneliness. Just the impulses of a very lonely child to collect things without understanding why. A big theme in the Owl House is the reality of growing up though, and hopefully with the implied promise of a familial relationship with King and a friendly one with the Boiling Isles as a whole, this child of the stars eventually grows into an understanding that may reflect a new title someday. Bosch's name is a great joke. Her name is a play on Hieronymus Bosch, a Dutch 15th century artist whose paintings of hell inspired the design of the Boiling Isles. Principal Bump is also named after this artist, as Bump's full name is apparently Principal Hieronymus Bump. Hardy har. A Kikimora is a female house spirit from Slavic mythology who can be helpful or malevolent depending on the behavior of the homeowner, and the homeowner in this case is Belos, which tracks. Also, Kikimora is a colloquialism for a rude, unpleasant idiot, which, well, yeah. Terra Snapdragon is mostly a punny name that is referencing earth and soil. Terra, along with the aggression and flashiness of the Snapdragon. Terra's name is perfectly on the nose in this way and reflects her expansive and dominant personality well. I think it's also worth considering that a character whose name is so rooted in earth and her talent is to grow beautiful, wild plants is primarily motivated by the need to dominate, control, and tame. Darius is a powerful name that evokes the power of kings. Darius the Great of Persia is its most famous bearer, and it is tied to ideas about wealth and stewardship. I do find this kind of funny because while Darius has this power, he is also the Coven head of the grossest Coven. Goop, monstrosity, slime, which taken with his kind of prissy personality makes for a lovely ironic twist. Altogether, it is a perfect name for a strong and insightful witch from a land of demons. This character is so minor, but his name is so funny that I think it deserves to be included here. Eber is another one of those names like Kai, in that it's a sound that has a load of meanings in several languages. But it's probably the Eber out of Old Germanic that means boar, combining with wolf to make a ferocious, monstrous name for the head of the Beastkeeping Coven, who is a tiny, nonverbal puffball. Adrian Gray recalls the picture of Dorian Gray, whose titular character is akin to a vampire or a seducer, but is also a profoundly unpleasant person. This character also has apparently an embarrassing last name, Vernworth, that he doesn't want anyone to hear about, which, if you get into the name, you might see why. Vern comes from vernacular, meaning common tongue, common, plain, mediocre. Which is in strong opposition to how this character presents himself. He's very pretty, has a pretty presentation, and is a monstrous fucking person. He's apathetic to the plight of others, and his artistic vision is all about his own ego. He is a terrible director and thus a great foil for Gus because unlike the true master of illusion, whose insight and empathy make him capable of truth in his magic, Vernworth here is a blind fool who can't make a convincing illusion even with an entire crowd of lackeys at his disposal. The Talisman of the Owl House have very basic names for the most part. Clover is a bee, bees pollinate and make honey. Ghost is white, and also Dana's cat. Owlbird is literally an owl, and his name is very punny. Most of them don't have a deeper meaning beyond surface level understanding or a simple joke like naming Luce's Talisman string bean. Although maybe there's a joke in here somewhere, because this specific fucking vegetable has about 5,000 regional names in Spanish, and this thing's a shapeshifter. I grew up calling these things ejote, but God, so many. However, there is one Talisman name that is worth taking a look at, and our final name on our list is... Flapjack, as a lot of people know, is an old name for pancake, which would have been contemporary to the 17th century when Belos and Caleb were from, and makes for a very gentle clue as to Belos' true identity and Flapjack's actual age. I remember when I first heard Flapjack during Hollow Mind, I was shocked because I knew that was a contemporary word to what we knew of Philip Wittebane's time in the story at that point. But that wasn't even technically where we got introduced to Flapjack. During a charity stream, Zeno Robinson did a monologue in Hunter's voice where he asked Belos what a flapjack is and learns it's another word for pancake, in addition to some really cool lore elements. But it's also where we get this absolute gem of a line.
Damn you, pancakes!
In all seriousness though, Flapjack was the first sweet and sustaining thing in Hunter's life, and it only makes sense that this extends to his eventual successor, Waffles. In many stories, especially those about magic, names have power. The Owl House leans hard into this, but the power that these names have is distinctly not literal in that there is no direct name magic in this story. But the characters' names in the Owl House are chosen with the same intention as any spell, with purpose, meaning, and a particular effect in mind. Every single one of them is carefully chosen and applied, and honestly does an amazing job of carrying through the themes, purpose, and laughs within it. Thank you all so much for watching. What were your favorite names in the Owl House and why? I know I couldn't cover all of them, otherwise we'd be here for a million years, but if there is anyone that I missed that you really wanted to hear about, please let us know in the comments below. Also, definitely check out the Bird's video essay on Tokyo Drift. He worked super hard on it and it's honestly amazing. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to make sure you never miss any future idlescree uploads. Thank you all for being such an amazing audience, showering us with all this support, participating in the polls, and coming together to form a really interesting community. Seriously, it's something that we never dreamed we'd ever have. So thanks again so much. This is the Bat signing off, and we will see you all in the next one. Whee!